welcome everybody to the first session of the spring term of the Latin American Anthropology Seminar. Really brilliant to see you all here today. Thanks so much for coming along. It's a really great turnout. For any of you who might be joining us for the first time, the Latin American Anthropology Seminar is a London-based seminar hosted by CLACS at the University of London at the School of Advanced Study. But we've been online now for a few years. We went online because of COVID, but it's been incredibly successful. And of course, it's meant that we can include speakers based all over the world, including, of course, in Latin America, and that people can also join us from all over the place, which has been really great for the seminar. So this is a seminar for early career researchers working in Latin America using ethnographic and anthropological methods. And we are three conveners who currently coordinate the seminar. Ainoa Montoya at CLACS, Denise Roman in Aberdeen, and myself, Jessie Sclair at Queen Mary, University of London. So the seminar runs fortnightly on Thursdays at 5 p.m. UK time. And the full program, I think Ainoa will post the full program for this term into the chat box now, so that you can see the future seminars we have coming up over the term. Just to let you know that our next session will be on the 2nd of February. I'm really sorry, that was my phone. That's very embarrassing. I should have turned that off. So our next seminar will be on the 2nd of February, and we do hope you might be able to join us for that one as well. We'll be hearing in that one from Dolores Signorens from the University of Cambridge here in the UK, and she will be talking about sowing futures, migrant communities, kinship and precarious labour in the garment industry in Buenos Aires. So I'm delighted now to introduce our speaker for today, Joali Rodriguez Aguilera, from Lake Forest College, USA. And Joali will be speaking to us today about Grieving Geographies, Mourning Waters, Race, Gender and Environmental Struggles in Oaxaca, Mexico. Joali is going to speak for around 45 minutes, and then we'll open up for a Q&A, and we'll aim to finish around 6:30 p.m. UK time. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function, or just put your question into the chat box and one of us will read it out. And please feel free to start posting questions and comments in the chat box as Joali is talking. We're also recording today's seminar. We won't be recording the Q&A, just Joali's talk, and that will be posted on the CLACS website after the seminar. So over to you, Joali.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here this morning. I know you are in another different time. And thank you all for inviting me. I feel very honored, and also thanks you for the invitation and the organization of this. So yeah, I'm gonna be talking about one part of my now manuscript that I hope is gonna be published in a couple of years. And it is about a case of environmental racism in Oaxaca, and what I call grieving geographies. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Can you all see there?
Yeah, that looks great, Joali.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so grieving geographies on the intersections of race, ecological degradation and gender on the Pacific coast in Mexico. So just to for the people who I want that there's like a actual image of the geography where I was working in. So it was basically in the state of Oaxaca. It is in the southeast part of Mexico, and specifically I was working on the coast, so basically the Pacific Ocean. And then if we look closer, this region in between the state of Guerrero and Oaxaca is basically known as Costa Chica. And this is one of the places where the majority of Afro-descendant, Afro-Mexican people live in Mexico. And again, it is just in front of the Pacific Ocean. And if we go even closer, so we can see here the state of Oaxaca. And then I was specifically working in a set of communities around a lagoon, which is a body of water. is called Chacagua Lagoons. And here we can see different communities that are within the lagoons, El Corral, Cerro Hermoso, Chacagua, El Azufre. But I like this map because you can actually see that it is always connected to other bodies of water. So you can see here the Rio Verde or Green River. You can see here another lagoon, La Tusa, and of course the Pacific Ocean and the lagoon where I was doing my fieldwork. Actually, the community where I was working in and based, it doesn't even appear on the map, which also says a lot, right? Like about how maps usually also can invisibilize or erase certain communities, specifically Afro-Indigenous communities. So I want to start with a vignette from Christina, who self-identified as an Afro-Mexican fisherwoman from the community where I was working with, that is Zapotalito. And she said to me, the water started to look like it was boiling, a lot of bubbles, as if something was being born from below. The water got very hot. It started to smell like sulfur. What Christina is describing here is, I don't know if you all remember, but in 2017, there was a big earthquake in Mexico, a 7.1 scale Richter earthquake. There were a lot of damages in buildings. Of course, there was like human loss, but no one talked about other consequences that happened. And what Christina in this vignette is describing is basically while she was fishing, the earthquake happened, and this is what she was living. She saw boiling water, a lot of bubbles, and then the smell, and this is going to be a very key point, the smell like sulfur coming out of the water. What happened a couple of days after the earthquake and after she felt that movement of the water was basically these images that you can see here. There was a massive death of fish, to the point that all the fishers from the community usually wake up at 6 a.m. to go and fish. This time they were approaching to the lagoon, but what actually woke them up, the whole community, was a very, very intense ammoniac type of smell. And when they approached the lagoon, they saw basically, I mean, this is an image, but what they describe is that you could not see the water. It was only dead fish, like tons of dead fish floating on the lagoons. The government didn't do anything. So it was the community through local organizations that they use their own equipment to fish to actually clean the water from the dead fish. And the only thing that the government did was offering like a truck to take out the fish from the community outside. But something that happened that was as strong as they described it to me was that, I mean, the lagoon is basically the primary source of living for these communities. It's not only in terms of community and economy and to sell fish, but also for consumption of the families. So if you wake up to a lagoon full of dead fish, that is basically not only how are you going to get money, but also how are you going to basically nourish and feed your kids. This becomes a tragedy. So what happened was that a lot of families decided to keep some of the fish to eat, even knowing the risk of what does it mean to eat a fish that you don't know the reasons of its death. But they prefer that knowing that maybe they wouldn't have food for the 3, 4, 5 days they didn't know. So this is just a description, a very raw description of the of the size of the tragedy. So this is then when I started thinking about how this case of the Chacagua Lagoon is a case of an ecocide, meaning a killing of an ecology. So what is happening or what is creating this ecocide of the lagoons? Here are some pictures that I took while I was doing fieldwork. On the first image, to the left, we see papayas. This region is characterized by growing a lot of crops, and papaya specifically. The thing is that all of these crops, I mean, for them to be maintaining in health and everything, they have to use a lot of pesticides. So these pesticides, through pollination, through air, in the end, get to the lagoon. So that's the first factor. Then another factor that we can see in the two bottom pictures is basically one of the main reasons of this ecocide, and it's basically that in the early 2000s, the Mexican government decided that this was it could be a possible good space for tourism. So there was already a bay, a natural bay created in between the Pacific Ocean that you can see here, on the back of the picture on the left side. There is a little canal that was in between the Pacific Ocean and the lagoon. So it was a natural bay. But the government saw it like, maybe a space where there could be even more tourism. So, tourism for exploitation of nature, as I say. And they thought, how can we build this? Okay, so maybe we can bring these concrete cubes that you can see they're massive. I took this picture and you can see the truck, so you can just get an idea of the dimensions. So they're massive cubes because the idea of this was to change the current of the water, so there was a bigger bay. What happened is actually, yes, it changed the current of the bay, but what happened was it permanently disconnected the ocean from the lagoons. So I'm gonna go back to this image of the map, because if you see here Cerro Hermoso, I don't know if you can see where I'm moving. So
yeah, we can see that, Jolie.
Okay, so this is the canal that was here in between the Pacific Ocean and the lagoons, and it was connected. Once the government built here these breakwaters, as they call them, basically this canal disappeared. So there was no more connection in between the Pacific Ocean to the lagoons, and it is needed for the oxygen. I mean, the lagoons feed from the oxygen that comes from the Pacific Ocean. It is important to say that here also, you can say that there was also a case of epistemological racism, epistemic racism, because the people from the community, the fisher people, told the government and the engineers that were there, like, this is not going to work out. I don't think it's a good idea that you put these breakwaters here. It's going to change the current of the water. What the people who was there building it said, you don't have the knowledge. We have undergrad and college education in engineering, and you don't have anything. So we know what we're doing. And what happened was exactly what the fishermen said, which was disconnecting the water and creating basically an ecocide, a possible ecocide of these lagoons. So here we start seeing how racism starts to be institutionalized, in the sense that they didn't hear the people, and also, these epistemological hierarchies of what is valid as knowledge and what is not, and then the consequences of this. The other picture is a picture over the summer of 2019 that I took, and you can see the color of the water is green. That is not the usual color of a lagoon. When I would ask people, why is this color? And obviously, as I said, with this very strong smell, people would tell me, they would say, well, when you have a cup of water, and you don't change the water over days and weeks and months, what is going to be the color of the water? Green. So for them, this is what is happening. That's why the color of the lagoon is green, because it doesn't have oxygen. So it's just stagnant water that is not receiving oxygen from any other body of water. And it is drying up also because it's very hot in that region. And one of the last factors into this ecocide is there's a transnational factory owned by US people, and it's a lime oil factory, and basically all the waste is being thrown into the lagoon. So a combination of pesticide, stagnant water, and then highly acidic and toxic material coming from the lime oil factory creates basically a very toxic environment. So when I would ask people back, what is the relationship in between the earthquake and the massive death of fish? They would tell me, well, of course, if you have all this toxicity laying on the subsoil of the water, and then with the movement, all these toxic gases came to the surface and killed the fish. And of course, I say that this ecocide is directly related as to a case of environmental racism. Environmental racism is a term that was born in the US through a movement of civil rights movement and by Robert Bullard, who was also doing research on basically neighborhoods, African-American Black neighborhoods, and how toxicity usually was specialized around racialized communities in the US. So I was thinking, okay, how can we think of environmental racism in Latin America, specifically in Mexico? And thinking about that is a majority of Afro-Indigenous populations who live around the lagoons, Mixtecos, Zapotecos, Chatinos, and self-identify either Afro-descendant, Afro-Mexican, or Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Mixtecos, Afro-Zapotecos, Afro-Chatinos, then we are in front of a case of environmental racism, because it's basically how ecological policies, ecological practices basically affect disproportionately people of color, or in this case, Afro-Indigenous communities. So what are some of the theoretical, methodological interventions that I'm trying to do with my work? First of all, I thought of the concept of grieving geographies as a concept. And how do I define grieving geographies? As spaces of collective and complex feelings of grief due to human and non-human death caused by violence. When I was going through the literature on ecological grief, it was fascinating. I found it really interesting, but I felt that it was missing something. It was missing the human component, meaning that usually it was described, as a geography that was being killed or it was dying, but I didn't see the human component and also the cause of it. So I wanted to actually highlight and put the point that it is caused by violence. And I say different phases of violence, from economical, political, but also racism as another form of violence. This is something also very personal, in the case that once I finished my fieldwork, and I was trying to start writing my dissertation at that moment, I suffered a big loss in my life. And once I came back, once I was feeling better, and I was just in a spot where I could actually come back to writing and reading. One of the main questions in my whole fieldwork and research was, how do you feel about the lagoons and the state of the lagoons? So feeling was there, at the center of my ethnography. So when I was rereading all the stories, everything that they were telling me, I felt a kind of like a mirroring of what I was feeling on my own personal path of grief. So then I started thinking, how can we think of grief also as a method, or not only towards a politically engaged research, but also towards an emotionally engaged research? In this case, how does grief operate as a method? How does my own grief help me to bridge theoretically, but also methodologically with the community? Obviously, taking into account hierarchies of race, class, my own privileges, and being in academia, but in the end, it created some sort of mirroring of this emotion. And then how can we start thinking about these other forms of engaging, not only politically, but also emotionally? And of course, because this is a lagoon that is dying, but has not yet died. So it's in this space in between life and death. There's still hope. So there's anticipatory grief, meaning they are grieving for the potential loss of the lagoon, but it is still alive. And because it is still alive, there's hope of maybe it will survive. Maybe if we do something, it will not die. So there's a grief in this sense. It's not individual grief, like in my case, but it's a collective emotion and everyday resistance for life. And of course, because they're grieving the potential loss of a body of water, then we can think of the intimacy between human and non-human, thinking of human and nature and the intimacy that it is created, for example, through grief, but also through the activities of the everyday life. So as I said before, my research is aligned with activist research methodology, feminist ethnography. I did 14 months of fieldwork where I was living around the communities. I worked with 3 Afro-Indigenous women-led organizations. I did interviews, 66 interview, oral history, participant observation, and this is also very important. I also did community participatory mapping. So we did map with the community by initiative of them. We map the community, the problems of the community, and how this ecocide could potentially affect them. The other mapping that we did was body mapping. So basically, this is another, feminist geography methodology where women represent themselves, they drew themselves, and we start analyzing the relationship between their own body as women with the land, and how grief, rage, sorrow, nostalgia, but also joy and love in regards to the space and the water was reflected in their own body and in what parts of the body. So we also did that. And of course, it was a multi-situated ethnography because I was not only around the coast of Oaxaca, but I also did some archival work in Oaxaca City. And I also talked to some governmental officers in Mexico City in regards to this case. The other thing about this grieving geography is that there's not only loss due to ecocide and the potential loss of this lagoon, but in this region, particularly in this region, unfortunately, there's narcotraffic violence. And actually, the lagoon has been used as a route for narcotraffic. So because of the ecocide, a lot of the teenagers from the community, because there's no jobs, they have been joining narcotraffic. And then, of course, there have been a lot of losses, human loss. So when I talk again of grieving geographies, I'm talking about human and non-human loss. Some part of these human losses are related to the ecocide because according to some fishers, they have documented cases of stomach cancer around the lagoons. And what they say, or what they think is happening, is that the consumption of these fish that is polluted is creating these cases of cancer. So we have loss of human loss due to this ecocide potentially, but also we have human loss due to narcotraffic violence. And also, of course, military violence, because there's a militarist region where you're walking and there's, army who are checking in on cars and everything. So then we have these lagoons as a complex space where there's a paradox in between hyper-surveillance, in the sense of army is there very present and they're like checking in every car that is entering into the communities, or they're really trying to control the region also, because something I have not mentioned yet that is really important is that these lagoons were declared a national park, basically a federal protected area in the 30s by Lázaro Cárdenas. So because it's a national park, there's federal regulations about the use of the water, fishing, mangroves. So then we have, again, this paradox in between hyper-surveillance, where the state is very present for the use of natural resources, for even the criminalization of some of these Afro-Indigenous communities and the traditional use of fishing, and versus a apparently stateless space for narcotraffic in the lagoons. So we have this, complex space of hyper-surveillance and then apparently stateless space for narcotraffic. And of course, fear is a very strong emotion, present emotion in the everyday life in the community because of the narcotraffic. So at night, there's almost like a masculine space in the communities. For example, for me, that I'm read as a feminine body, people would tell me like, okay, all the women, feminized bodies cannot leave the house once the sun sets down because it's dangerous. And of course, another collective form of grieving and where community would organize was the funerals in the community for people who would die because of narcotraffic or other reasons. But there was a whole community organizations around funerals and grief. So a collective sense of grief. So after all these, when I was thinking about grieving geographies, what I'm trying to argue, one of my main arguments for this work is that grief is a mobilizing force. Is basically grief is a fuel for political mobilization. So instead of grief becoming this emotion that just stops you and you stop doing everything, is all of the opposite, because again, there's hope that maybe it can survive and that it can recover its life. So grief becomes a mobilizing force for collective organization, because grief is not only sadness, but it's also rage, sorrow, nostalgia. A lot of the people that I was interviewing were really angry about the state of the lagoons. Here you can see actually a picture I took. And this is what has happened. Like, so in this canal that I told you that is disconnected the lagoon from the ocean, now how it has been disconnected is because now there's like dunes of sand of the ocean. So people usually ask me and ask the people like, so why don't you just like, grab something and take it out by yourself? But you need industrial machines at this point to take out all this sand. So it looks like almost like a desert when you're walking in between the ocean and the lagoons because of the amount of sand. So when I was doing my interviews, people were very angry about the situation of the lagoons, and they were also very nostalgic. They would tell me a lot of stories, like when the lagoon used to have a lot of fish, when I used to go in between the ocean and the lagoon. A lot of women had even like memories of their children or when they were pregnant in the lagoon. So there's actually a lot of, emotional connection to the lagoon, and even a spiritual connection. So because this grief is a complex grief that is not only sadness, but also rage, nostalgia, sorrow, then grief starts, in a sense, organizing life and then mobilizing people for political mobilization and the defense of their land and water. For example, some men, usually men from the community, and here there's a picture of some of the fishermen outside of a Mexican government office in Oaxaca City, in the capital of the state. Basically, they did a protest outside of the office, and here you see, it says, please, we need oxygen, we need that the breakwater is open. So usually it's very gendered, the defense of these lagoons. So usually men are the ones who go outside of the community to do these protests, and women are the ones who stay in the community, which I would argue there is a legible form of activism, and then there's an illegible form of activism. And I feel that a lot of the women do these illegible forms of usually organizing life or defending life. There have also been human rights reports with local offices, but also the case has even been brought to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in 2018. Part of my work helped to bring that audience. And what was obviously there were recommendations by the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights to try to solve this problem. The main solution would be that those big cubes of concrete are taken out. Up until now, the response of the government has been that now they don't have money to remove those cubes. And that has been, the excuse for the past 7 to 8 years. So the state response in general has been either silence, or because it's a national park, but also it attracts a lot of tourism from the global north, but also middle class, high class from Mexico. It's a place where nature is exploited in a sense of it is commodified, but at the same time is this paradox of, like people come from all over the world because there's like surf tours and all this, but at the same time local people are in the everyday life living this ecocide. So what I'm saying by these illegible forms of activism is the everyday reproductions of life. And I'm here engaging with Silvia Federici, but also Gladys Sul from Guatemala, and how domestic work, basically by taking care of the kids, by cooking, by making tortillas, fishing, cleaning the house, they're sustaining the basic life of the communities. For example, while men go and protest, a lot of men also have been trying to leave the communities and migrate to the US. So usually, in the everyday life is a very feminine space where women are up front of the survival of the community and of course of the lagoons. So for me, these illegible forms of politics are these forms of taking care of the basic, basically reproduction of life by feeding their kids, fishing, trying to clean the lagoons and taking care of each other. When I say taking care of each other, I found that even though they don't call it this way, but there are mutual aid initiatives in the sense, like, for example, some women have to go out of the community to sell handcrafts. So then their neighbors take care of the children. Or if they don't have enough food, they put it together and they cook together for the whole community or the families. They also have organized to walk together after the sunset or whatever. They walk together for safety reasons. Here is a picture I took where women were organizing to make some woven like handcraft like clothing that is traditional from the coast. So they were having workshops that they organized, so in order to have another alternative income that was not coming from the lagoons. So they were organizing some sort of like also alternative economies to survive. Here you can see actually some of the handcraft traditional clothing. And if you see, in this picture, you don't see a lot, but you can actually see that the traditional clothing from the coast, they usually wove into it animals from the ocean. Like here you can see some crab and some in others, there are crocodiles. So even in the traditional clothing from Indigenous people, Mixteco people, there's even that explicit intimate relationship to the land and to the water. And of course, they're also producing medicinal plant products to sell to tourism, but also local, consumption. So even these things talk about the deep knowledge they have of the environment and, the medicinal properties of the lagoons. But all of this is because they're grieving, and instead of this grief to, as I said, stop mobilizing, or that is just like you will have no hope for anything. I feel that this grief has become a fuel for political mobilization, but also for collective memory of how they remember the lagoon and how it's an ancestral land. Because something that I didn't say is that these Afro-Indigenous communities, in the case of Afro-descendants, they were maroon communities who were escaping from slavery, and they came to the coast. And in the case of Indigenous people, they were there, and then some of them mixed, and they were Afro-Indigenous. So these are actually ancestral lands. And there is a collective memory of how it looked, the lagoon, before this ecocide and how it is now. So this grief is almost like also an ancestral grief, but also it doesn't stop there. It actually says like, okay, we cannot let this happen. Like a fisher woman, Afro-Indigenous woman told me like, we cannot let this happen because if not, our children are not gonna know about the lagoon. And this will be basically a ghost town, and we cannot let that happen because my great-grandparents were here, and we have so many memories, and I want that my children remember the lagoon. Something also sad that happens that it has to do with sensorial memory is that because it's a lagoon that is polluted, you cannot touch it. Because if you touch the water, you get rash. So a lot of the fishermen and fisher people like get rash when they touch the water. So imagine like it's really hot in the summer and they cannot go and swim. So all this has created some sort of like all different types of grief of not being able to touch the water, not being able to play, and the smell. Like it's a whole sensorial experience in the sense that you're looking at a lagoon that is green color, you're smelling it and it smells bad. You cannot touch it because it will create rash. So all the senses are really being affected. So that's why I say it's a deeply affective, but also sensorial grief. And that's why they are trying to defend it so hard. And of course, this grief also creates practices of human and non-human care. This is a photo of a collective of fisher women that I worked with. And here they are actually in another canal that is connected to the other lagoon that I show in the first map, because they believe that if they clean that canal from mangrove, from wood, but also from trash, at least the lagoon would have like a source of oxygen. So they're trying to do alternative like solutions that they're thinking for taking care of the lagoon. And also right now they have a project of studying and reproducing mussels. And also they're trying to cultivate more mangrove so the lagoon doesn't die. So they're trying to, strategize what can we do with this if the government is basically not coming here and is silent. So how can we make the lagoon survive? And they keep organizing. And that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joelle. That was absolutely fascinating.